This Week in Startups is brought to you by Squarespace. Check out squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use offer code TWIST to save 10% off on your first purchase of any website or domain. And Athletic Greens, the most complete supplement for a better you. Receive 20 free travel packs valued at $99 with your first purchase. Go to athleticgreens.com/twist.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I've heard awesome things about all of your companies, so I'm really looking forward to learning about all of your companies later this afternoon. But my name is Clara, and I'm here to talk to you about the pros and cons of creating a board of directors at the seed stage. But before I jump in, why don't I just give you a brief background on me? So I run a fund here in San Francisco called the Urban Innovation Fund. So we invest in startups shaping the future of cities. And that could take a variety of different industry verticals into account. It could be transportation, it could be fintech, it could be early childhood education. It kind of runs the gamut in terms of industry verticals, but all at the really early stage. So we're writing pre-seed and seed stage checks somewhere between 100 and 500K initially, although we do like to invest over multiple rounds. And we also offer many of our companies political and regulatory strategic support, since many of them operating in urban spaces need that kind of help. Okay, so with that out of the way, should you have a board? Well, this is a question you may have been asking yourself recently, and if not, you will be shortly, because it comes up a lot during the fundraising process. This used to be more of a Series A consideration, but now that firms are raising multiple seed rounds and they're raising larger seed rounds, it's coming up earlier and earlier with investors. So, what is a board of directors? Well, I'm going to guess that most of the companies in this room have a board of directors, whether you know it or not, because your lawyers probably made one for you in your bylaws when you were first incorporated. But right now, it's probably just you and your co-founders, and you're not really doing anything with it. So for the purposes of the conversation today, when I say create a board of directors, what I'm talking about is sort of taking it to the next level when you're starting to invite external folks to join the board and you're really formalizing the structures and processes of that board. Make sense? Great. So it's important to understand that this isn't just an advisory board. This isn't a group of folks who with high-profile titles that you put on your deck to kind of lend you some credibility when you're pitching. This board actually has legal obligations, what are known as fiduciary responsibilities. So the board actually oversees all of the major elements of your business, whether it's fundraising, establishing salaries, hiring and firing, coming up with the overall strategic vision for your company. It's a really important and big job. And the thing to remember here is that the board is not there to represent your interests as a founder. They're there to represent the interest of all shareholders in your company, which includes you, but is not limited to you. So, to board or not to board? That is the question of the day. Let's start with the cons. Why not do it? Well, you'll hear some founders say that it's an administrative hassle, and it does take some amount of work. You have to put in the time, and you have to create materials. It does involve a little bit of time, but not a crazy amount. And you'll also hear some founders complain that they just don't want to give up any control at the early stage. They don't want any external input, which you will get when you have a board of directors. You may also have investors who don't want to join your board. So at the seed stage, you'll oftentimes see funders with really large portfolios, and they may not have the time to actually join your board, or they may have already gotten the investor controls that they were looking for because you may have raised a price round with preferred shares, and they may have gotten what they wanted already. Also, something to keep in mind is that Series A investors don't care whether you have a board of directors or not. When you raise a Series A, they will probably restructure your board in their image, and they will, cycle on, and other people will cycle off. So for them, it doesn't really matter whether you had one or not. So it's not something for them that is a priority. So why do it? Well, first, you're really not giving up that much control. At the early stages, you will almost certainly have a board majority, so you'll still be able to do pretty much whatever you want within reason. But you'll also gain access to some really experienced partners who can help you deal with both positive and negative experiences that you've probably never dealt with before, and those could include getting a lawsuit, or perhaps getting an acquisition opportunity. And this is something that happened to two of our companies actually this past quarter. One ultimately decided to take the acquisition offer, the other didn't. But I promise you, both of those founders had never gone through that process before. They didn't really know where to start. They didn't know who to talk to. They didn't know what was market. And I'm fairly confident that they were both glad that they had advisors around them that could help them kind of negotiate that process in a smart way. A board can also be a great accountability tool for yourself. You're creating financials regularly. You're doing milestone-based planning. You get regular gut checks from a third party. These are things you should probably be doing regardless as a founder, but I don't know about you, but when no one's watching me, I kind of let things slide a little bit. And so having a third party that's there checking in regularly can be a great tool. But also, seed really is the new Series A. And with big checks do come big responsibilities, and so you may find that your institutional seed investors will require you to make one, whether you want it or not. Okay, so let's say you decide yes to the board. What does that really involve? Well, let's start with board size and composition. You're going to want an uneven number of board members because you don't want any ties. Typically at the seed stage, your board will be 3 people, although sometimes you'll see 5. And so it's typically a founder, a lead investor, and someone else. It could be another co-founder. It might be what's known as an independent who's coming in and sort of as an issue area expert. But the goal here really is to have one representative of the preferred share, so that's your lead investor, and 2 representatives of the common. So that's the founder and then the someone else. If it's your co-founder, they likely are already holders of your common stock, and so their interests are very aligned right away. If you bring in somebody from the outside as an independent, you may find yourself having to grant them some common shares just to make sure that their interests are aligned with yours. And that is a pretty easy process and something you just kind of want to talk to your lawyers about in terms of how to make sure that that's market. You may be in a situation where you have kind of a smaller investor who wants to join the board, and that's not really appropriate, even though you really like them. Or maybe you have a board member or an investor who's really pushing to be a board member and you really don't trust them and you don't want them on the board. Another alternative is to be able to offer them a board observer seat, which essentially means that they get to attend board meetings, they get access to board materials, but they don't vote on anything, which is a big difference. But you also might find that you have some investors who would be happy with even slightly less, what's usually known as information rights. And that essentially means usually that they get access to the quarterly and annual financials that you're preparing for the board. When you create a board, you definitely need to put in place D&O insurance, which essentially protects the board from issues of liability. Never join a board before asking if they have D&O insurance. Believe me. And this is pretty easy to put in place. You should talk to your lawyer and figure out what the sort of appropriate level of insurance is for you. Typically, it's like a few grand a year, but it's definitely a non-negotiable. And something to keep in mind, it's really important that you set up the board carefully and that everyone who's involved is someone that you trust. But ultimately, the composition and the size of your board will change a lot over time, so this isn't set in stone.
Yes, Squarespace. I love Squarespace. We use it for all of our event websites with dramatic, striking results. Beautiful websites. Go check out launchfestivalsydney.com. We're going to go to Sydney in June, and we're able to pop up that website in minutes using the incredible templates available to us at Squarespace. It's so powerful. It has full e-commerce functionality, so you can sell anything you want online. And you can customize that look and feel, the settings, with just a few clicks. And everybody in your organization can learn how to edit your website. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. And if you want to buy domains, you can choose from over 200 extensions. And of course, it comes with a never-ending list of features. They just keep adding features, but they keep the price the same. That's the beauty of software as a service. They have analytics, so you know how to grow. And built-in search engine optimization. You don't have to hire somebody to do that. It's all built in, as well as free and secure hosting. Now, if you need 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, award-winning customer support, it's there for you. But I'll be honest, I doubt you're going to need it because it's so simple and so easy to use. But it is nice to know that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, you're going to get that great customer support. So here is your call to action. Go check out Squarespace.com for a free trial. Go ahead. Check out Squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch your beautiful website, just use that offer code TWIST, T-W-I-S-T, to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Make it yourself and make it stand out with Squarespace. It's a great company, great people over there, and they hosted my first talk for my book, and I thank Anthony and the team over there for supporting us with that great, beautiful space. If you're looking, by the way, just as a side note, this isn't in the ad copy, but if you're looking for a company to work at, oh my God, Squarespace has a gorgeous office, and what a great team. You could do a lot worse than working at Squarespace. It is pretty dope. Okay, and they're in New York, by the way. Well, let's get back to this amazing episode right now. Thanks again, Squarespace.
So, what happens before the meeting? Well, first, you're probably going to be meeting on a quarterly basis. The meetings will probably be like 2 to 3 hours each. They could happen in your offices, maybe in the offices of another board member, or even your lawyer's offices. Who should attend? Your board members, obviously, and any board observers. And you may find yourself inviting your lawyer under certain circumstances because the board is dealing with legal issues sometimes. And you'll definitely want to send a packet of materials to your board in advance so they have time to kind of process what you're going to be talking about and make the most of the time you guys have together. I would say at least 24 hours in advance, but ideally if you could do it even more in advance, that would be even better. And typically what you're sending out is 1, an agenda, 2, an update deck that you're going to actually run through during the meeting. And that'll include, your KPIs, things like cash on hand, earned revenue, number of customers, stuff like that. And you'll want that to be consistent over time through every meeting. And you'll also want to share your financials. So your cash flow statement, your income statement, your balance sheet, stuff like that. And I'll just note, shorter is sometimes better. We had one company that I sat on as a board observer for this company, and they would just send out like crap loads of information, and it was always different every month, and it was really hard to compare, quarter over quarter or month over month, and it was just sort of a waste of time. So I would encourage you to kind of keep it tight, focus on the information that's most important, and everyone will thank you for it. So what happens during the meeting? Well, the point of the meeting is accountability. The idea here is really to kind of look at what the CEO said they were going to do last quarter compared to what they actually did, evaluate if there's some discrepancy and kind of figure out why, and then talk about what you are hoping the company is able to accomplish over the next quarter. It's pretty simple. And we found the most sort of helpful agenda topics stay consistent over time, and they're usually the following. And I just pulled this from one of our company's decks. Financials and sales, staffing, product, fundraising, key milestones, challenges, and help needed from the board. You'll also want to designate someone to take minutes just so you can memorialize any key decisions that come out of those meetings. You'll find it's kind of amazing how people forget. I am a very forgetful person, and so it's really helpful to have those minutes. You could designate one person to take minutes every time. Maybe it's a rotating position, so every board member has to do it. I've seen one company actually have their lawyer come in and take minutes because they wanted the minutes to be perfect. Keep in mind that when you have the lawyer come in, you have to pay them for their time, so I wouldn't necessarily recommend that. Cover your ears. We're in a law firm. But it is helpful to actually to do those minutes. And while this isn't necessary by any means, I have seen a few boards actually designate a chair for every meeting to kind of make sure you stay on topic. You're going through a ton of information. It's a really long meeting, and you want to make sure you get through everything by the end and that it doesn't have to be any longer than it needs to be. And typically, again, this is a rotating position. It's not official. It's just nice to have someone make sure that, no one goes off on their soapbox or for a tangent for 20 minutes and then you stay even longer. So what happens after the meeting? Well, I would encourage you to distribute the minutes, again, because people are forgetful, but also because it's great to have the board kind of acknowledge and approve the minutes to make sure that all sort of key decisions are memorialized and also everyone's really on the same page. I would also encourage you to follow up right away with board members if they have some kind of outcomes that you're expecting from them. Maybe they offered to make an introduction, or they were going to send you some pro forma documents. You want to get those right away while they're still thinking about you, because most of your investors have a lot of companies that they're working with, and they will quickly forget that they owe you something. You'll also want to find ways to translate the outcomes of the board meeting to your team. It's definitely not appropriate to share every part of the board meeting with the team. But they are the worker bees who are going to be carrying out your vision and your goals for the quarter. So making sure that they understand that you have certain expectations for the quarter and how they fit into that is really important. And maybe that's one-on-one meetings. Maybe that's a group email. That's something you've got to decide for yourself. But it's definitely important to make sure that they're roped into whatever your goals are for that quarter. So I will leave you with some observations. One, there are definitely positive externalities that come from corporate governance, that come from having a board of directors. We, as the Urban Innovation Fund, typically encourage companies, once you've raised $750K or you've raised a price round, we suggest that you create a board of directors. That is by no means a consistent opinion across investors, but that's our opinion. Two, you definitely want to clarify your expectations around the board. How much time do you need from them? What are their responsibilities and what are not their responsibilities? This is just a way to make sure, again, everyone's on the same page, but also you don't want anyone disappointed in the process because you're going to have to work with them for quite a while. Three, you definitely want to surround yourself with people that you trust. It's really rare for a board to remove a CEO, but it can happen. And so you want to make sure you're picking people who you can trust and rely on, and that you can keep control of your board at the seed stage. And four, a board is just a great opportunity to maximize your relationships with your investors. They have money and they have a network, and you need all of those things. And engaging them through the board is a way to sort of build a consistent relationship with them. We had a company recently raise a bridge round exclusively from existing investors, and that was, I think, facilitated very much by the fact that they had a really strong rapport with their board, and their investors kind of knew them really well, trusted them, felt like they were super responsible. So when it did come time to raise, it happened like that. So, hi.
Hey, sister.
So with that, I hope you learned a little bit about having a board of directors, and I would love to answer any questions you might have.
Give her a big round of applause. Was everybody paying attention? You see anybody on their phone?
People were nodding
Good,
a lot.
I like that. If I see that laptop or phone, I'm confiscating it. Oh, what's going on over there? I got you. Put that laptop in your bag, okay? Go ahead.
Okay. So when the company's early and you don't have like an external party yet, and let's say there's two co-founders and both of them are on the board, you see that other person every day. What is kind of like the minimal touch points that you need to involve the board at that point before you have the external party? Do you know what I mean? Like, because if you're working with that person every day, does it make sense to sit down every 3 months and go through the stuff that you talk about on a daily basis, or what's best?
I mean, it depends. Some companies do nothing. It's just the two of you in a room. You see each other all the time, and the argument is you don't need that. Sometimes it's helpful to just carve out a little bit of time just to sort of say, what are our goals for the quarter, and then did we achieve them? It doesn't have to be a huge minuted meeting, but just something is helpful. Although, again, this is sort of for very early stage companies, most people don't do anything.
So I actually interestingly work in early childhood. So do you pay extra to your board, and how do you pay them? That's the first thing. And the second thing, are there additional requirement, document paper-wise, that we have to put together in order to form legally? That do we have to file it to the ACC, or is it going to be like a standard bylaw stuff? So
you don't pay your board at the seed stage. You're many stages of funding away from wanting to do that. The only exception is if you do that sort of external board member who's coming in which case you're going to probably want to compensate them with a small amount of common stock. It's usually somewhere between 0.5% to maybe 3% if they're really, really, really important. But again, this is something you should talk through with your lawyer to make sure you're doing what's market. But yeah, you don't really compensate them at that stage. And your lawyer can help you formalize what that process looks like to sort of add someone to the board or take them off the board.
Yeah, it depends when I was on the Dine board, which was a company that was pre-public but making tens of millions of dollars. They would pay for my travel. They didn't give me cash comp. I didn't want cash comp, but public companies do pay like $50,000 a year in cash comp. You can look that up sometimes. But I had equity, so when they sold, it became well worth it. In the seed stage, nobody gets paid. That's weird. That'd be really weird. But equity would be in the, I think, 25 to 1 point range for a good board member, maybe more. It's a negotiation. You want to vest it monthly, and you want it to be that you can discontinue at any time. And that keeps it healthy, and you want to outline what that person's board responsibility is going to be in bullet points in the document or in an appendix to your document or just in an email in an agreement that says, like, hey, we would like introductions to venture capitalists, you could even say like, a dozen or two a year. We want to be able to meet for lunch once a month, or we want to be able to have a phone call once a week. Just outline what the expectation is, because sometimes when these things go bad, I tell one story where a founder just took away my options and was like, you can sue me. And I was like, that's a great look. I'm going to sue you over, 1 point in your company after you used me for 2 years to get where you want to go. Point's never going to be worth anything if that's the way you operate. Next question. Oh, here. Hey.
Quick compound.
Right to the microphone, yeah.
Quick compound question. In the old days, I'm just wondering if this is still happening. Sometimes a company and their lawyer, if they're really close, would appoint the lawyer to the board of advisors, and they would attend board meetings as a board observer, maybe take minutes and advise the board. Second, whether or not they're doing that, is there any good software or online system for preparing board minutes rather than just typing up the notes and getting everyone to sign them?
I don't usually see lawyers take either observer seats or actual board seats unless there's some really extraordinary situation, like maybe you're a legal startup, in which case having their sort of extraordinary level of service might be helpful. Although, again, I do see companies who invite their lawyers to the board meetings and appoint them to take minutes and things like that. In terms of software, unfortunately, no, but it's not like rocket science. You just set up a deck template and you just fill in the numbers, and they change a little bit every quarter, but you're pulling them from your financials anyway. So I don't think it necessarily requires that level of complexity.
Most people have their attorney at their board meeting, in my experience. Keep your board meetings in the early days to an hour or less. At the end, you just do business, which is like, are there any stock grants? Are we going to approve the last board meeting? That's the only vote that occurs typically. Major hires, you might run past your board as well. But yeah, you wouldn't have a lawyer on the board itself. That would be a little bit of a conflict, unless they were extraordinary, like in the like the patent startup here. Okay.
Hi, Memna. First, I want to say there's Eva, which is Voicera, and that's great at taking minutes. It's a great technology, so you should try it out, because it will be free till May. That's it. But my question is, we actually had a board since the early days, because we have a law firm, and they actually want to be observers for free because they think that's better for us in the future. But my question is more on the people side and on the team side. When you're a small company, right, and you're hiring obviously a lot of juniors because you can afford the seniors, and you have this team culture of like, we're here all together, you're all in it. On the other side, you're like, oh, but there's a board and there's an executive team. And so it's kind of conflicting messages. And so like, what's your advice in terms of how to communicate that to the team without them feeling there's a wall in that sense? And on the other side, same thing, like your early investors, like people who cut you like $25,000 checks, or really it's not that much, but sometimes they feel entitled to a lot of things. Like, how do you deal with that without messing the relationship with them, but to say, hey, by the way, like, I still want to keep this information for me? So,
I mean, you may have small investors who you want to have involved or who feel like they need to be involved. And again, you can offer them an observer seat or information rights. You'd be surprised how many people will be happy with just getting information rights, quarterly reporting. You will have an investor who has like a really unrealistic expectation in terms of, like, I gave you $13K 4 years ago, therefore I deserve a board seat. And you just kind of have to find tactful ways to shut it down. Usually it helps because you'll have a much larger investor come on board who makes it very clear that they're not getting that seat. So that's usually what happens. But it's usually a negotiation. I would say over time, most people, if you talk to them, are reasonable or reasonable enough, and you can figure it out. But usually putting someone who puts such a small amount of money on the board is just awkward, especially for a seed stage investor like me. I'm still coming in really early stage, and for me to have to boot someone from the board is just annoying. I don't know if you have any thoughts on this.
Yeah, the interesting point you make is how this creates like this star chamber like anxiety driven, like, oh my God, there's a board meeting. Mm-hmm. And so what I would do at my companies is I would take the board deck after the board meeting, because people knew the board meeting was occurring. I would put the deck on the screen and I would walk everybody through the slides and say, here's what we told the board, here's why we gave them this information, here was their feedback. And then I would just leave out the last couple of things, like if we're giving equity grants, maybe we don't want to see that, or if there was some legal issue, maybe we would leave that out. And then when we send our update to investors at inside.com, we actually send them the board deck minus a couple of pages. So there's no big, and in fact, if our board deck was released, we would be excited about it if it got a Wall Street Journal or New York Times story, because it just talks about how enthusiastic we are about the business and the key metrics. And board meetings just create a disciplined moment in time, 6 times a year, let's say, for an early stage company. 4 times a year for later stage is probably the right numbers in my experience.
Yeah, quarterly is fine.
Quarterly's fine. Some people, I've seen people want one every 6 weeks with young entrepreneurs. I think that's crazy. 5 times a year is fine too. If you want to ramp it up 6 times, it's kind of like the upper boundary of normal in my experience. And you just have to diffuse that energy by just showing what happened in the board meeting and making it not that big of a deal for folks. We require now, if we have over 5% of a company, the option of a board seat, which is kind of crazy because we have notes and people haven't even done their cap tables yet. And we made our own little side letter to explain that. And we don't actually stop that anymore. People tried to stop. A couple of people questioned it, and then we've had VCs who come in later who said, oh, we're going to get rid of your board seat option. And we fought them on it, and we won every time. And fighting it means I get on the phone and talk to them and say, like, I will never send you another deal. I'm a point guard, you're a center. Like, I will never pass you the ball again if you take away my rights. And then the VC gets in line.
Yeah, I mean, usually you can work something out. Like, usually we were talking about you have 3 people on the board, but you could go up to 5, in which case it's usually 2 founders, 2 investors, and 1 external. Independent. So you can figure it out.
One hack I like for the independent is the founders get to pick the independent, but the board has to approve them.
Yes,
Creates
definitely.
a nice balance where like the founder feels like it's their choice, so they have more ownership and they have 3 of the 5 votes. But you can't pick your grandma or your cousin Billy and put them on, like, because we have to approve them. It has to be reasonable, right? Wait for a microphone. He's got the microphone.
Hey, thanks for the tips. I wanted to ask what the difference would be, say, between an advisor and a board member, say if they both had 1%. What would be the responsibilities of those two?
It's the fiduciary responsibility. So there are legal obligations as a board member. You have to approve the financials. You ensure the company files their taxes. If you're fundraising, you're in charge of that. If the company gets sued, you have to deal with that, which is, again, why you want D&O insurance. So an advisor really is meaningless other than like what you put into it, whereas a board member has legal responsibilities.
Yeah, one has no legal standing, the other has tremendous. And that's why a lot of VCs are like, I don't want a board seat. We phrased it as we want the option of it, and we will take that option. I tell everybody in 2 circumstances. One, things are going fabulously well, and we think we can really help, and this is going to become a $1 billion company. And the other is you ask us to help because things are going awry and you need our help. And then anything in between would probably just pass on it for now. We actually do a Friday board meeting every other month with like 4 or 5 of our founders. So we actually put them all on the same day. And then we created a little working group where they get to sit in on each other's board meetings under FriendDA. It's a higher form of NDA. So, in fact, May, Cafe X, Underground Cellar, and a couple of other companies all come in on the same day. They all do their board meetings, and they sit silently, 8 people on one side of the room. I don't know if I ever told you about this, but it's my little board training thing, because my theory is if you start board meetings a little bit earlier, you'll just stand out compared to your contemporaries in the zero-sum game of startups where VCs can only invest in so many companies. If they see you have board meetings already, you've got board decks, you've got minutes, I find, I don't know what you think this signals something more serious, but I feel like it creates a discipline and an organization that makes the company more appealing to later stage investors. You think so?
For sure. I mean, I don't know if Series A investors are going to care one way or the other, but the outputs from the board, they will care about, like the quality of your financials, your tax filings, whatever, your records generally. And more likely than not, you had to answer more questions about your business. So you'll have a really strong message by the time you're ready to fundraise for your next round.
Jason, so would you recommend to actually constitute the board, including the external board member from the very beginning?
Well, most people don't have the board set up until they actually do a price round and convert all the shares. Most people are on notes. So they don't even have that level of organization set up. But you can ask your lead investor, if it's a seed person, to do it, and you could run mock board meetings or just kind of update meetings where it's not an official board meeting, but it's a quarterly state of the business. That's reasonable.
Even if you're raising on a note, you can do it. We definitely encourage companies. If you've raised a certain amount of money, like if you've raised $1 million, that's a real business. It's got serious responsibilities, and you should be accountable to somebody. And so I definitely encourage companies to do it. But if it's just like you and your co-founder and you haven't raised anything yet, there really isn't any reason to create a board beyond that, although you can formalize some of those processes like we were talking about earlier.
I'm in agreement. Any more? Okay. Let's hear it for Clara Brenner.
Thanks, guys.
Very well done. Okay, hey, let me take a moment to thank Athletic Greens. I have found something that has put me at the top of my game. If you've been following my Insta, you know I'm out there on the tennis court, volleying and serving and just getting out there and trying to be less fat. I am loving playing tennis, and I have been taking Athletic Greens. They are delicious, and my wife likes the fact that I'm getting healthy and not drinking 18 Diet Cokes a day anymore. I am drinking my Athletic Greens. She makes me a beautiful smoothie in the morning. The whole family makes them, and we all drink this Athletic Greens, and they spent 10 years creating this. It's efficient, complete, convenient, nutritional insurance for you. 75 ingredients covering 11 areas of your health, and ensures you give your body what it needs through the day so you can power through and get everything done as an entrepreneur or a journalist or whatever you're doing if you're listening to this student. It replaces a fistful of supplements, and I don't like taking all those pills, and it adds critical nutrient support. Again, we love it. We drink it. And actually, people here at the office have been drinking it. So here is a special deal for our This Week in Startups listeners. 20 free travel packs. Because, when you're traveling, God, that's when it goes right out the window, the diet. 20 free travel packs valued at $99 with your first purchase. Getting into a daily routine with Athletic Greens really will be the single best thing you do for your health and success this year. I can say that. So go to athleticgreens.com/twist, athleticgreens.com/twist, and claim your special offer today. That's athleticgreens.com/twist. Don't miss out and get that free 20-day or 20 travel packs for free, valued at $99. Thanks again, and welcome to the program, new partner, Athletic Greens. So nice to have you here with us.
Oh, hello, everyone. My name is Domingo Guerra with Appthority.
I mispronounced your name. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. Cool. We're going to do probably around 30 minutes of presentation and then some Q&A, but I was told to try and keep the Q&A till the end. If there's anything like super urgent or something, just raise your hand. But otherwise, we'll do questions at the end. Oh, no worries. A little bit about my background. I'm originally from Mexico, moved to Texas for college, studied mechanical engineering, went in robotics, worked at Applied Materials there, then Applied Materials here in the Bay Area, did a master's in engineering, then later did an MBA, because I've always wanted to build a company, but I felt like I wasn't prepared. And it got to the point where one of my advisors in the business school says, you're never going to learn about it in a book, and you're never going to learn about it in a class. You learn by doing, as all of you know. And I decided to just stop studying stuff and then just quit my job. And this is kind of a quick tale of the last 7 years. It's been a fun ride, and hopefully something that can be helpful to you all. Very quick about the company. We're in the mobile security space. we served large enterprise, managed mobile devices, mobile apps in their environment. I used to have to ask how many BlackBerries in the room, and it's funny now, right? But I mean, we went from a world where every single employee that was a VIP or an important employee had a mobile device issued by the company, owned by the company, to a world where every single employee, not just the sales executives, not just the executives in general, but every single employee brings their own mobile device. It's iPhone or Android. Now they decide what device to bring. They decide which apps to install. And they're all accessing corporate clouds, corporate networks, corporate data, and corporate documents. So we help the Fortune 500 manage the risk of mobile devices. And overall, let me see, can I use this one? Thank you. See, that's BYOD, bring your own device, can even work for these kinds of attachments. When we first started the company, we realized that there was some focus in the space around mobile device management, and that's bigger firms like Citrix, Mobile Iron, VMware with AirWatch, and Microsoft Intune. And overall, they were handling the device management, granting employee access to email and to Wi-Fi, but they were very manual and cumbersome to manage. Rather than try and go into that space, we said, let's use them as a platform, let's use them as a partner, and let's automate all the provisioning, but more importantly, managing and securing and automating response and remediation on any device that was on those platforms. So we were able to then come in, provide automatic analysis of every single app that every single employee downloaded. As soon as there was malware, corporate data laws, compliance issues now like GDPR in Europe, anything that would violate a corporate policy, it wasn't just alerting an admin and trying to take an action, but automating that action. Anyway, we can talk more about Appthority after the talk. Shoot me an email, shoot me a message. Happy to discuss the company. But one of the first things I learned about the startup world in practice instead of in theory and in books is a very famous philosopher called Mike Tyson had to say, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the mouth. And startup life, you get punched in the mouth early, often, sometimes multiple times a day. The first two slides are more for people that are just about to get started. I know all of you have product and customers, but some of these principles, I think, carried on from day one till Series A, till Series B. One is you have to double kind of every plan or every budget that you think you have. Everything's going to take longer than you think it is. When we were bootstrapping, we should have saved twice as much money as we thought. When we were fundraising, it took twice as long as we thought. Like most things take longer than we plan. Planning is difficult. Forecasts are difficult. So always have, like in mechanical engineering, if you build a bridge, there's a safety factor. Like we can support so many trucks. Well, it's 10 times the load or whatever. Try to do that in some of your planning as well. The business model we did in business school, like no one ever read a business model. No one ever asked for a business model. But the process of creating it forced us into doing some things like market analysis and trying to understand really the buyer versus the user, how the customers buy, what they buy, how they build. We're going to try and take questions at the end. You mean business plan? Yeah, business plan, you're right. Thank you. The market study was the really important part, more than the document. From the lean startup stuff, that book was, I guess, interesting, the build, measure, learn, the pivot, but a lot of it has been around for many years in lean manufacturing in the automotive space, or product design and development and the startup design method of fail early, fail often. But what can you measure with the least amount of work to try and then focus your effort and your work into something that's going to be higher probability of success? What kind of triggers can you get as early as possible? And what kind of prototypes, even if they're vaporware, but what can you learn from those prototypes so that you do that in real time as you're building? And then from the co-founder's perspective, from our perspective, we saw that it very early on, some of us wanted to maybe stay in work. Some of us had already quit our jobs, and we found that everyone has to be in the same boat, whether that means everyone quitting or in terms of scope, in terms of how long you're going to stay with a company. All these things are very important. as soon as we had started, we realized that we didn't have the support system of the large enterprise, and you go into doing everything yourself. And when you're early stage, you're still carrying a lot of the responsibilities and you're wearing many hats. You're always going to wear many hats. But as soon as you start fundraising, getting revenue, et cetera, it's time to balance the do it yourself just for saving money versus let's go get someone that's an expert in this field or is going to be much easier or much better at this task. And as a founder, it's not my job to say, well, I really like the marketing aspect or I really like the sales aspects, I'm going to focus on that. It's, no, I'm going to get the person that's the most productive or the most effective at that role, and I'm going to go do something else to make the rest of the team productive. So we're always going to be wearing hats, and it's not always hats we want to wear, but it's the hats that are going to be the best for the company at that time. Creating schedule was also something that was very important in this up till today, is how we focus our time as founders, how we focus our effort and our and just our attention. If you don't have product roadmaps that are clearly defined, you never know how you're doing in terms of process or progress towards that goal. If you're not meeting regularly and checking in on that, on those updates and having some sort of metrics and measurables, you're kind of designing in the dark, you're kind of building in the dark. And not just for products, but for your business plan, for your sales model, for your marketing team. Everything should be, I mean, from the big companies, the only thing I did actually learn, I guess, was process. And a lot of times in startups, it's like, well, we don't have too much process, but you want to have enough to know that you're making progress. And then, especially in the Bay Area, there's a lot of startup this, startup that, startup happy hour, startup events. It's very easy to get distracted and sucked into that and doing a lot of the social events, which are fun, but they're not adding a lot of value to time where you could be networking in more meaningful ways or building product or making sales. So it got really cool for a while, this Facebook movie and all this like startup stuff. You're not cool just because you quit your job and you have a startup. I mean, you can be cool when you build something and it did well in the market. So don't get carried away in that. And then everything's changing and change is constant. And that's the only thing that I guess you can count on, is that things are going to be changing all the time. Not just about the company or the technology, about yourself, what you like at each stage, about your co-founders and your team. Some early folks maybe are great at that stage, but are not necessarily going to scale with the company. And maybe your first engineering team is great at a certain task, but maybe the team is not going to be great to manage a team as it grows, and you have to bring someone else for that. Maybe as a co-founder, you can, if you're honest with yourself and not have kind of that ego, maybe you're going to realize that you're better at something smaller than what this company is becoming, and you can bring outside help, whether it's a professional COO or professional CEO, but be open to that, to know when maybe you've outdone or reached a stage where you're not growing as fast as the company needs. And that's, again, for co-founders, for team, for everything. You're going to get a lot of advice. Everyone has advice to give, but it's also too much advice in a way. You have to develop kind of the spidey sense of saying, you know what, this makes sense, or no, this doesn't make sense. Not always, you want to listen to your customers, but don't listen to every single thing they ask for. Again, you're going to have scope creep where you can't really build everything. So you start developing pattern recognition as to what makes sense across the largest number of customers. That's how you prioritize your roadmap. A lot of customers might say, I really need this. And you say, well, are you willing to pay for that? No, then maybe they don't really need it. So try to identify ways to know what to build and what not to build. And then also, it's very hard to meet with people that are pretty busy. We need advisors. We need people that we can network with, but everyone has to eat. So I've leveraged a lot, never eat alone model, try to have lunch with someone, try to have coffee with someone, make it easy on them. Hey, I'll bring you coffee, give me 10 minutes. I'm not selling anything. I just need your advice on XYZ, keep it short. But that's something that you never stop. When you're early, when you're growing, you're always gonna need advice, and you can always learn from others. So when we were started in June 2011, we called the company Very Smartphones, VSP. Very quickly, we started realizing we couldn't get any URLs or any things around VSP because it's also visual service plan. Everyone's eye doctor goes through a VSP plan. So, okay, that was good to find out early. Then I had been to a wedding in Mexico. The Mayans have the jaguar, Balam, protected the people. And we said, hey, that's cool. Protect, Balam protect. It's a looking glass, looking for risk. It's the eye of the jaguar. And everyone hated the name, but no one would tell us. Everyone's like, oh, yeah, that's cool. But eventually someone told us it was bad. We also focused on a problem that we thought was going to be big. It is big, but it was way too early. We were protecting Android from malware, big issue. But in 2011, it was such a big concern that enterprises were not even allowing Android devices. So in 2011, inside a big company, it was either BlackBerry or iPhone. So we had something that no one could buy because they didn't really have the problem. They were just afraid of it. But we started learning from customers that they cared about not just malware, but security and privacy and data exfiltration, and obviously not just Android, but iOS as well. So it forced us to tackle a harder problem, which was how to automate the analysis of iOS apps and how to look for more than just malware. Way too early, but again, there wasn't really a big market for that yet, but it gave us a big advantage over the eventual competitors, and I'll get to that in a second. So then we started iterating quickly, not just with the technology, but with the positioning of the company and the messaging. So at first, we were really the authority in app security. The market started shifting to not just focus on apps, but focus on the device. What if the device has a vulnerability? What if there's a man-in-the-middle attack? Is that connected to a Starbucks with a fake Wi-Fi or something? So we started expanding from just apps. We realized that a lot of security companies sell fear. And if you don't buy this, you're going to get hacked and you're going to get fired and blah, blah, blah. But we said, what if we in mobile can take another approach and try to sell trust? And it's a slight tweak, but it's all about how do I enable your employees to be productive. You don't want to be the guy in IT that's always saying no, no, no. Why don't you let employees manage their own device, manage their own risk? If you tell an employee, help us protect the firewall, they don't care. But if you say, hey, here's a tool for you to protect your own mobile device, everyone's got pictures on your phone or conversations on your phone that you wouldn't want leaked. And I think that's a way to make security personal. And then they end up protecting your company as well. So we changed a lot in that messaging. And then went later into a more professional logo as we started growing. And now it's full mobile threat protection. There's actually a new slogan that we just launched, protect what matters most. Security is now tied a lot to personal security or personal privacy, and that message is resonating well for us. So it's just, you're not just done with the logo, you're not just done with your name or your messaging. That's something that's going to change as well as the market evolves. Something we learned out of necessity, everyone here have a seed or raised some capital, most folks. So you guys are lucky. Like, we thought we were getting a grant, we quit our jobs. There was a big DARPA grant on a project. Pictures are fine. A big DARPA grant from the Department of Defense for a project similar to what we were building. So we quit our jobs, applied to the grant, opened a bank account because we were expecting to get the check, and then we didn't win it. And then we said, well, we can then start, okay, we have nothing except our savings and our credit cards, but we can either try and get a seed, or let's just build something and see what happens. And we opted for that. So we went for 1 year unpaid, no salary, just building by ourselves and trying to raise money eventually, thinking it was going to be easier than it was. But we found that there's ways to be creative in cutting your costs. A lot of the large enterprises, they say, yeah, we'll do a proof of concept, we'll do a POC, but we need 24/7 support. We can't hire anyone for that, but with if this and that, we wrote some scripts. So if any of our customers' emails came in, no matter what time of the day, it would ring all our cell phones until someone replied, and voila, 24/7 support. Professional logos were really expensive, but designcontest.com, you put $300 and people from all over the world submit designs, so those were our first few logos. Legal services, incorporation, NDAs, licensing agreements can be very, very expensive. We work with a law firm specializing in startups that defer payment until you get funding. That saved us some money up front. PR teams are very expensive, but Twitter and email is free. I mean, you just have to invest some time. We reached out to reporters and journalists that were covering the mobile security. We shared our research, share our findings, help them put out good content, and then build relationships so they'll cover our company when we were ready. Rackspace.com had a startup program, I think they still do, where instead of spending $4,000 a month on Amazon, we got a year for free. And then startups, environments, peer mentorship is very helpful. Anything you can learn from a founder and learn mistakes they did, you can avoid them, and that's going to be very, very valuable. So for us, the fundraising game started, and it's a game. It started in September 2011. The VCs called us, like we hadn't even reached out to them, They have spies, a network of spies inside the enterprise software space, and they're saying, what products are you using? What new startups are you hearing from? And suddenly someone heard from us and they called us. If you're playing startup bingo for all the keywords, these were the keywords of 2011: mobile, security, apps, cloud, big data. We said, awesome, it's gonna be super easy. We're gonna walk out with a check. And then after the meeting, they're like, what the hell is Balam? This name sucks, I would never fund that. You're just a feature, who's gonna pay for this? Who's gonna buy this software? Why aren't the big guys doing it? And you never hear no, you just hear come back next month and come back next month. And that's recurring, driving San Francisco to San Hill Road all the time and come back next month. And in a way, they're learning from you. The investors, they are sitting on a bunch of money, but they don't have enough time or bandwidth to invest, obviously, in every company. But they're interested in mobile, they're interested in security, so they learn from you. We weren't experienced entrepreneurs with a proven track record, so they also want to learn, hey, next month you said you were going to hit X metrics, are you going to hit it or not? If you're not hitting it, are there people buying from your competitors? Maybe I'll go invest in them. So it's a two-way relationship, but really it's a relationship where the power is sitting on their end. As a entrepreneur, you can only meet with a certain number of VCs or investors at a time or at a week, right? But from their perspective, they do this, thank you. They do this every day, all day long. A friend of mine manages a very small fund, like $2 million, and he met with 800 startups in 1 year, last year. So, I mean, you don't have time to do that, right? I mean, you're building product, you're selling, but know that they're just gonna have an unfair advantage just from that perspective. If you're running out of money, you're also decreasing in your negotiation power. And eventually, if you do get an offer and you're out of options, and you're out of options, you're gonna take it. You also, we find out the concept of practice VCs or practice pitches. Like, you don't want to burn your top ideal investor very early, because you're definitely not going to be ready. No matter how ready you think you are, you can always improve on your pitch and your messaging and how you present it. And by having some practice investors where we wouldn't be disappointed if they said no or they said come back next month, you hear the same feedback and you hear the same questions. And stuff that you thought you were answering very clearly, you realize you were not. If everyone's asking you the same thing, that means you're not demonstrating that or in your technology or in your presentation. You really have to know their interests. What have they invested in the past? Not so much in that I don't want to tell them if they might have a competitor portfolio. That I don't know how often that really happens, but more in like, we had some investors that were really, they made a lot of money with consumer-focused companies, and we were an enterprise company. And some early investors said, no, you should be doing freemium, give this away for free, and eventually you'll figure out a way to monetize it. I said, no, I have large customers writing checks, like they're paying for this. No, but enterprise sales is slow, and yes, it is, but it's just, investors will usually do what they've had success with, and you have to have alignment in that kind of model as well. Also, it's not a win to get a meeting. Investors, they're going to meet with startups. That's what they do. But you want not just to get the meeting, get a meeting that's a warm introduction. An investor that gets an introduction from a former portfolio company or a current portfolio company, you've already cleared a huge hurdle in the trust model. Hey, if Jim introduced me and I funded Jim before, I trust Jim. Jim wouldn't waste my time with someone that's not worth it. So that's already, it's still a meeting, but it's a much more valuable meeting where you're coming in at a higher level. And then VCs are, they're investing money, but more importantly, they're investing time. They're investing an allocation of how many boards they can sit on or they have time, right? Once you know that an investor wants to invest, once you know what percentage of the company really they want for it to be worth it to them, try to maximize the amount of money, because for a lot of investors, writing a check that's 1 million or 2 million or 3 million, it's the same to them if they're sitting on a big fund. For you, it'll make a big difference as a company. So that's something that you can play with. Sometimes the brand is bigger than the technology, and I'll get to that in the next 2 slides. The timing was really important. If you're just getting started and one investor says, yes, I'm in, let's do this, and you just got started in your fundraising process, you're not gonna have time to then go spin up other interested investors to be able to have maybe potential bids to jump or compare from. So you want to manage it almost like a sales cycle where you have a certain group of folks through the funnel, not a really wide net, because again, you want to pace it until you're ready. but do cohorts of 5 to 10 meetings at a time. And based on that progress, you say, maybe I take a break. I'll go work on the technology, go work on the deliverables that folks need or the traction that folks need, go work on my presentation, and then try again later rather than just hitting up against the same wall time and time again. You want to be able to set a date as well. Part of the reason folks were saying not yet or come back later is because there was no impetus for them to invest right now. What do they lose if they wait? Nothing. What do you lose if you wait? You're losing a lot of money and time, right, in doing that fundraising. But if you set a date, hey, we want to launch by this conference. We want a yes or no by this date. They're not going to say come back next month. They're just going to be able to say yes or no. And I'd rather get to a no earlier than later and just know where I stand. Again, folks are going to call your bluff, so don't just make up dates, but treat it more of a process. Plan your rounds. Fundraising takes a long time, and spending money is very, very easy, and I'll get to that in the next few slides. But if you raise too little, you're going to start fundraising again immediately, and you're not building, you're not selling. If you raise a lot of money, it's great. A lot of folks say there's no problem in raising a lot of money. One of the problems I see is also if you just have a lot of money to throw at the problem, you don't learn how to solve certain issues. But the flip side of not having enough money, running out of money, is you're dead. So raise money, but do it smartly. And then eventually, you're going to need some partners that are trusted to help you evaluate term sheets. For us, we got a term sheet, and apparently it wasn't great. For us, it was great. It was money, right? We were running out of money. In February 2012, we get one term sheet, about $3 million for our Series A. We had bootstrapped up to date, so that looked great. But our advisors, our legal team, again, they're not getting paid until we get funding. They said, you know what? It's not the greatest offer. If you can wait, wait. So very tough to do, but we declined it. And then a month later, we had the same team, the same technology, same customers, markets exactly the same, but we had multiple offers at more than twice the valuation for more than twice the money. Again, earlier, I said sometimes more than technology, it's the brand. And sometimes all you need is kind of FOMO from the investors that if they don't invest, someone else will. We won an award, the most innovative company of the RSA Security Conference. Most innovative company of the year. Sometimes you got to get chance to chance, apply to these contests. They'd selected 10 startups out of 1,000, and then we ended up winning. But again, just being on that stage and getting validation from the judges that are chief information security officers for big companies, big investors, and big industry recognized folks gave us enough of a humph as unproven entrepreneurs to have someone that knows what they're doing to say, yeah, these guys are legit. And then suddenly we were legit. Sometimes that's all it takes. So you got to apply to these contests. And I think if you don't overdo it, it's time well spent. So you raise your money and then all your problems are done. No. So you just get different problems. You run out of excuses, so now you have to execute. But you also get an opportunity to finally go higher. You don't want to be very, very frugal. I mean, it's good to be frugal. But if you're doing it to the point where it's impeding your growth, then you're going against the whole reason of why you raise money. Now you can go build a bigger team, go do the investments that you haven't been able to do to now. But it's really important to keep a budget. Our first year that we bootstrapped, we spent $50,000 total in the first year. The first 3 months after a Series A, we spent almost $200,000. At that rate, you're going to run out of money very quickly. So it's much easier to spend than to raise. We got a part-time CFO to help us set a budget and really be able to see what's important, what's not important. But then we remembered how difficult it was to raise, and we went back to err on the side of being frugal. But don't try to do everything yourself. Hire folks. With investors, we also started having now board meetings, and it was important to set boundaries and set the pace of how it's going to be going forward. You want to get help from your investors, but it's very different to get help than to ask for stuff in a way that makes you look like you're not on top of things. So if you go in and you say, I don't know what to do, we have this problem, and I have no idea where to even start, then that's not a very good show of confidence for them that they just gave you money and you're an expert and you're supposed to be building something. If instead you come in and say, hey, we have this issue, we explored option A and option B, we're leaning for option B because of X, Y, Z, and this is what we think is going to happen. What do you think? You're still getting help, but it shows a lot more thought out process and a lot more control in what you're doing. So if you build it, they will come, right? No. But again, the brand matters, the marketing matters. Don't just invest in technology. try to invest in how your customers are going to find out about you. From our perspective, enterprise software, a lot of folks were saying, well, I'm just going to buy whatever Gartner says, or I'm going to evaluate whatever Gartner says are the top 3 technologies or the top 3 approaches. But Gartner won't write about you if you're not a Gartner subscriber. So sometimes it's kind of like, it feels like a scam, but you have to pay to play that game. So we started working with the analysts and showing our research, and we were named a cool vendor, and then we were the youngest company to make it to the Magic Quadrant, and that stuff matters. It was a marketing expense that put us on the map against some bigger players, so the enterprise would even know we existed. Contests, again, that helped us with the recognition, but more importantly than contests for us were trade shows. That's where the IT teams, that's where the security teams were going to learn about new technologies, and that's where we wanted to be so they would even know we exist. We were replacing something that was very tedious, like manual software analysis, automating it and applying it to mobile apps. I mean, hindsight, it seems obvious that it should have been done, but it wasn't very obvious. Folks wouldn't even know that that existed. So before we invested in SEO, we needed to have folks even know that this exists because they weren't even searching for it. And then thought leadership is really important, especially in an early space. For us, social media like Facebook and stuff wasn't very important, but Twitter, a lot of the IT guys were very heavy Twitter users, very heavy LinkedIn users for LinkedIn groups. And we started investing there, doing blogs and leveraging bigger brands to help us reach those customers. So by partnering with the Mobile Irons and AirWatch and VMwares of the world, for example, we were able to leverage their brand, their user conferences, their blogs with our content. We helped them seem smarter about mobile security. They helped us get in front of all the right folks. The business model requires innovation as well. It's not just the technology. When you bought software analysis way back when, and still today for non-mobile apps, you paid by software. So if you wanted to do a pen test for a website, for a piece of software, you paid $10,000 or $15,000 for a researcher to sit down for several hours or days, try to break it, and then tell you how to fix it. You're not going to do that for mobile apps when every single device now has over 100 apps and you have 80,000 employees with 80,000 devices. So we said, let's change the way that folks are charging for software analysis and make it all you can eat based on the number of devices. So our bet early on was that the number of mobile devices in the enterprise was going to grow from just BlackBerries to now everyone having a mobile device. And if we charge a yearly subscription based on how many devices you have, then we would analyze all the apps that you wanted without counting. That worked out, but also it changed the way that they would budget because they don't know how many apps they need to analyze any given year, but they have a pretty good idea how many devices they're going to have based on the number of employees. So that was very new in how we approach software analysis, and it paid off. It's hard to raise your price, even sometimes with new features. So we always opted for having a higher price and then discounting it. Oh, we'll give you a special discount if you give us a marketing statement or if you have a white paper or whatever. We won't lose on price, but we won't have a low reference price. We'll try to price higher. And then once you have revenue, it's great. All your problems go away. No, you just get different problems now because now that your board has some expectations and now you have to somehow know what you did this quarter, what you're going to do next quarter, and modeling and predicting is very difficult. So I'm going to go a little quicker because from this perspective is how do we start changing our sales model? When we first started, our sales model was not planned at all. It was just myself. It was more of a BD approach of trying to find the right product market fit. I think a lot of you folks are probably farther along than this, but someone is like, what was your pipeline early on? It's like, what pipeline? We'll say yes to anything and see what we can sell. Not very repeatable, not very scalable. The next few years, we hired a BD guy that could come and help me. And then we found the right type of partners where we can go in and immediately add value and leverage their customers. So our first product was really an API, and it was just a subscription that was kind of B2B to B. So we sold to companies that were selling to enterprise customers and other businesses. But then we started getting revenue. I have a joke that the first sale came with the first panic because we got our first big check, $42,000 seemed awesome, and then I lost the check. And I couldn't find the check, and I was too embarrassed to ask the customer to give me another check. And we were moving offices, and it was right after the funding, and eventually we found it stuck between two cardboard boxes, and we were able to cash the check. The customer never knew. They just thought we had a lot of money because we didn't cash the check immediately, so we seemed bigger. But that early model of just doing a lot of small deals and focusing on SMB, we started getting revenue and we got a false sense of confidence, but we didn't learn enough. The really small customers were happy with the product as is. They were not asking for feedback. They were not giving us new ideas of what to build or new feature requests. So we had to make a sacrifice in 2013, 2014, where we said, you know what? We're not going to be a very defensible technology if we don't innovate and iterate, and everyone's too happy with the product. So we made a decision that ended up paying off, but it was difficult, like declining that first term sheet. We said we're going to divorce some of our early customers and go target the enterprise. We got rid of the BD approach of just trying to touch everyone and focus on enterprise sales. And for a while, our sales dropped a lot because our product was not scaling. It was not enterprise grade. It didn't have a lot of the features that were good enough for the SMB, but not good enough for the enterprise. And the customers now were very demanding. But that forced us to really go back to that quick iteration. And now we knew we had something that was kind of important, but now it got us to take that to the next level and from an enterprise perspective. The first 60 days from when we hired our new VP of sales, we met with 60 of the Fortune 500 CISOs. I mean, we bought the Rolodex basically of an experienced security salesperson to come in and introduce us to everyone. And we got in front of all the projects that were active. And it took us some time, but eventually we started learning how to sell inside the enterprise. And now the product was years ahead in months amount of time, just from the type of feedback that you get from enterprise customers. We thought we can always go back to sell to the SMB. Like if you can sell to the enterprise, you can sell to anyone. We just want to make sure that we built the right thing. So that was a good investment, but also a lot of education. When you're early in the market, you're the only one educating folks on why they need to spend in mobile security. We started growing the team, and then one of the big mistakes that you can make is that you try to do too much too early. We started getting success in the Fed space, so we hired a federal sales guy. We started doing success in Europe, so we hired a European sales team. And if you're not focused in your backyard and you don't own your backyard and build really the experience here, then everything's going to suffer as well. We were stretched too thin. We realized, though, that we could do a lot of the work in the Fed and in Europe through partners and resellers. Our early model with resellers failed because the product was too early and the features were not there. But once you have a few years of experience and you really nail down that product market fit and that onboarding of your product to the customer is a lot easier, then resellers can sell it. Then it's easier. So then we started working with resellers in Europe and in the Fed space, and we ended up closing our sales offices there and just focusing all of our sales resources into dominating the enterprise space here in the US and in Canada. So much more focused. We ended up not losing a beat. We didn't lose any customers. We didn't decrease our growth. In fact, we kept growing our growth in the Fed space and the European space through partnerships there. So we're a hybrid model, direct sales in the US and then partners abroad. And now our current sales process, our first VP of sales, great getting us from 0 to X. But if you want to go to double X or something bigger, not everyone scales. Very early, it was relationship selling. It was who do they know, who have they worked with in the past. Relationship selling works because you have already trust, but it's not very scalable because, again, you don't know everyone. And it can be very slow if you're building those relationships, and your sales cycle can get very, very long, especially in the enterprise. So now we're doing more of a challenger sales model. There's also competition, so you can't take the time of just building these long relationships and getting to a yes that way. You have to come in and maybe challenge a customer that's already been polluted by a competitor or already saw a competing product and they think that that's the right approach. You have to come in and say, no, this is why it's wrong. I'm not here to like be your friend and agree with whatever you're saying. I'm going to challenge you and say, you're wrong because of XYZ. That approach will not scale because of this. To ask them to test this or ask them to test that, here's how we solve it, here's why this works. We also don't just do POCs or proof of concept for anyone that wants to try the product. We don't give you login credentials indefinitely. You don't get access to our product until you have budget. And if you need help getting budget, we can do a quick scan of your enterprise. So we built a small product just for the sales process. So we do a quick scan of every device, tell you how many devices have malware, you want to know which ones there are and how to fix it. Then you have to sign up for my service. But now you have proof that you have a problem, you go to management with that proof and you get budget for the project, then you can get tools and our credentials. Last 2 slides and then questions. But when we started, everyone would ask at the trade shows, why do I want to analyze these apps? And aren't Apple and Google already doing this? And aren't any app from the App Store, isn't that already safe? Like, very, very different market. We had to educate that it's not just malware, there's data exfiltration. A lot of developers make mistakes, and that ends up exposing all of your corporate data. Obviously, now that's changed. Everyone's heard, I mean, Facebook's been in the news, but a lot of companies have been in the news for poor privacy or poor security. There's starting to be regulation in Europe. Now that there's all the Me Too's, all the competition, as a market, we're educating all the customers. Now our marketing dollars go into how are we different? Why our approach is better? Why is that approach terrible over there? So your selling changes, again, your messaging changes. Now you don't have to educate as much as to the why. Now it's more about the how. Again, the technology has to win, but I always tell our sales team, like, if we can get head to head, I'm confident we're gonna win. I'm worried when we don't even get to the table because a bigger company with more marketing dollars got there first. So you start playing marketing warfare against the bigger companies. A lot of big companies now are implementing lean startup approaches where they announce products before they even have it. That used to never happen. They used to announce once they had the product. Now they'll spend some marketing dollars just to slow you down while they build or they buy someone else to then go compete with you. So all the BD meetings that you used to have, now you don't know if they're really trying to just learn about the product to build it themselves. They're doing build, measure, learn, or build, partner, buy approaches. Now they're saying, well, let me learn from you and maybe partner with you or buy you or just build it internally. And then from closing thoughts, startups can make you bipolar. You have the highest highs and the lowest lows sometimes on the same day. So don't drink your own Kool-Aid and then don't freak out over bad stuff because nothing's as bad as it seems at first. We got our term sheet, that second term sheet that we ended up taking on a Thursday at like 4 p.m. And it was like the best day ever. And the next day at 9 a.m., my doorbell rings. Our apartment was our office. And we got sued for patent infringement from a company that had tried to buy us. So in a period of 12 hours, we went from the highest high to the lowest low. And again, it's all constant like panic and fire, but you can't let that, you can't carry that stress for years and years and years. It's just not gonna work. You have to be like Teflon and just let everything slide. Again, don't drink your Kool-Aid, but serve plenty of Kool-Aid to your team. From the measurables perspective, you want VCs to invest with their heart. They're buying that vision, they're buying your vision and your passion. If you have too many measurables and wait too long and you have, I don't know how many quarters of sales, then the investors immediately think with their MBA brain and they plug it into Excel and you're worth X and your company's worth Y and that's what it is. It's math. So yes, have the data, have the measurables, but sometimes maybe it's better to raise earlier than wait until it's perfect because what might be perfect to you in terms of measurables maybe takes some of the potential hugeness out of the equation. Also, sometimes you don't need the money. But I always say you're always fundraising. Looking back for like our Series B, we had a few quarters that were just incredible growth. Like we couldn't even believe it that was happening. That would have been the perfect time to do your Series B. Not when you go back to like big growth, but not like insane growth. So sometimes maybe you're sitting on quite a bit of money from revenue from a previous round, but something happens where it just looks incredible metrics. Maybe that's a time to think about the fundraising. You're not fundraising now, but you're still giving updates to folks that you want to fundraise from in the future. You're still doing those things from time to time. Your investor updates, it's not just for your current investors, but for other folks that you want to keep warm. Make sure they know that you're around and that you've been doing well. You're always closing. Again, everyone needs mobile security. Hit me up. We'll help you with some app analysis. But you're also always hiring. Everyone says it's so easy to recruit. There's so many engineers here, but there's also a lot of competition. And keeping your team happy and not kind of wandering around to other projects that they might want to look at is very important. But when you find an incredible employee, even if you don't have an opening for them, maybe it's worth opening them for them because it is tough to recruit top talent, especially with so much competition in the room and in the Bay Area. So that's what I had, and happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Domingo. That was an amazing talk. I'm sorry that we only have time for a few quick questions. Will we be able to get your slides after? Is it okay to share those with the group? Yeah, amazing talk. Go ahead.
Thank you. This is Ladislav. A great presentation, by the way. Quick question. After you raise money, you need to deploy the funds. And especially in the area of hiring, it's not all in your control. How do you deal with the challenge of should I hire people faster and with the chance that I might have to fire them faster, or should I take longer time to make sure that they're perfect employees?
So it's a balance. I'd say hire slow, fire fast. Like if there's an employee issue or something bad, you want to eliminate that issue quickly. Bad situations age like fish, not like wine, right? But if you hire too fast, it's also like rookie move to hire and fire all the time, and that doesn't give confidence to your team. So have your team be selective in who they hire, not to the point where you don't hire anyone, but I'd err on the side of hiring slower rather than faster. Sometimes you have to use recruiters, and I hate that because it's expensive. But if you do need to grow faster than what your network allows, then you have to do that. Now, once you have a bigger employee base, you can also tap their networks. I'd rather pay my employees for a good referral than pay that to a recruiter. So we've offered vacations like, hey, you get a flight and hotel anywhere in the world if you bring someone that can do this, or you get 5K or whatever. But I'd rather do that and keep it into the company and motivate the team to bring top players than to just pay a recruiter, but it's a good expense.
Sure. So two quick questions. This is Mike from Oxford. So one is, you mentioned that you've been iterating on your slogans. So how did your product change, and also how are you testing whether the message works? And when you talk about channel partners, because when you're selling to SMBs, how do you convince them to actually take you on, right? Yeah. Because it's a ton of risk for them.
Yeah, so for the messaging, we do like A/B testing, and we test the messaging with some of our key early customers. We created like a customer advisory board where we can bounce ideas, not just from product, but from messaging as well. We have a CISO advisory board as well, based on CISOs are probably the number one folks that are getting pitched on daily. I mean, every single email they get is someone trying to sell them something or steal their password, right? But they hear everything, so they're a very good sounding board to see what kind of messaging might work or not. And then just being flexible in that and being able to change. Don't get married to a new slogan before you get kind of a confirmation that it's going to work. From the partnership perspective, to be honest, some of our early partners were just marketing partnerships. Some of our early partners, we didn't even do the full integration. We announced the partnership to see if there would be any reception to that buzz. The ones that did receive folks saying, yeah, I'm interested, then we would prioritize that API integration and go from there. You're in a need for eyeballs, and a lot of times they're in a need for content. So if your product fulfills something they don't have, you're helping them as well. So yeah, they're gonna let you be on their blog. They're gonna let you be in their user conference. They're gonna let you do that announcement. They're gonna pay for that press release. They have those funds, but they're getting something out of it as well. You just know that you have power there as well.
Oh, hang on. Okay.
Sorry, just to bounce on that question, couple of things. One, like who would you go to in the partnership? Like who would you talk to in the other company to start discussing that, especially when you're a small player?
Yeah.
And they're a big player. And the second question is, sometimes you see partnerships that could be actually competitors, like Front App and Intercom. Like Front got kicked off on a guest post on Intercom, and Intercom today actually just released a new version of their product where they have shared inbox like Front.
So there's a balance, and I'll tackle the second one first, like where you have like a friend of me approach, where you might not be direct competitors, but you're targeting the same customers or you're going for the same dollars. So maybe that's not the best place to start. But there's a lot of times where customers might have to buy two solutions. And if you can make it easier for the customer to buy, you're both going to benefit. So for us, there's these resellers that specialize in mobile that sell the management and sell the security. Let's go and have them sell the bundle so that from that perspective, the customer only has to make one purchase from that reseller, and my technology already integrated with that partner. So we're making it easier on the customer and easier on the reseller. And that's kind of like a win-win-win from a partnership model. In terms of who, if you want to get done, it's going to be with a product team. If the product team wants to integrate with you, it's going to happen. But they don't always have the time to find you. But the BD teams will meet with anyone. So that's kind of like you can get into the door when the BD team, but if you can get a warm intro to the product folks, that's who's going to have the power inside the organization. They're going to understand the customer more than the BD guy. And the product team, if you're able to align with what they're struggling with, it's going to happen. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. It was very useful to hear your journey. One of the things you highlighted was the sort of the bold move you made to say we're going to retire all of these smaller customers for, because they're not good customers for us, and we're going to go after bigger ones. But obviously, in the meantime, there is a huge gap in revenue. Mm-hmm. How did you manage through that process? In particular, I imagine you had some investors on board at that point, and sort of how did you guide everyone through that?
Yeah, so one of the advantages is that for us, we're SaaS and we get paid upfront a year in advance. So from a cash flow perspective, it's great. You have that customer. You're going to dump them in the sense that I'm not going to be doing and building new features or going to find more customers in this space, but I'm going to continue to give them service for the amount of period they already prepaid. So that helps you take this kind of leap into another space while you figure out that sales process. We didn't just stop having money. We already had the money up front.
Okay. Thank you so much. Domingo, big round of applause, please.
Thank you.